Have you ever wondered why some people seem to lose credibility the moment they open their mouths? Why certain phrases can instantly make someone appear less intelligent, regardless of their actual capabilities or knowledge? The words we speak reveal much more than just information. They expose our thought patterns, emotional maturity, and psychological development. Carl Jung, one of history's greatest psychologists, understood that language isn't just a tool for communication. It's a window into our unconscious mind and a reflection of our inner psychological state. Today, I'm going to reveal 7 specific things you should never say if you want to be perceived as intelligent and psychologically mature. These aren't just communication tips. They're insights into the psychological patterns that undermine our credibility and prevent us from reaching our full potential. What makes this approach different is that we're not just looking at surface-level communication mistakes. We're diving deeper to understand the psychological patterns behind these statements. Patterns that Jung identified as barriers to what he called individuation. The process of becoming your most complete and actualized self. I've analyzed how these verbal patterns play out in real conversations, meetings, and relationships. The impact of eliminating these phrases from your vocabulary is remarkable. You'll be taken more seriously, your ideas will carry more weight, and you'll develop a reputation for wisdom rather than reactionary thinking. In this talk, I'll walk you through each of these 7 problematic statements. Explain the psychological mechanism behind why they make you appear less intelligent. And most importantly, offer you alternative approaches that reflect greater psychological integration and maturity. Let's begin with the first phrase you should eliminate from your vocabulary immediately. Number 1, that's just common sense. The first thing you should never say is, "That's just common sense," or its variations. "It's obvious, everybody knows that," or "It's just basic logic." This phrase might seem harmless on the surface, but from a Jungian perspective, it reveals a psychological pattern called inflation, an overestimation of one's own perspective and a failure to recognize the complexity of reality. When you dismiss something as just common sense, you're actually making several problematic assumptions. First, you're assuming that your perspective is universal, that everyone sees the world exactly as you do. Second, you're shutting down deeper exploration by suggesting that something is too obvious to warrant discussion. Jung understood that what seems obvious to one person may be completely foreign to another. Not because of intelligence differences, but because of different life experiences, cultural backgrounds, and psychological makeup. What's common sense to a banker might be completely counterintuitive to an artist, and vice versa. More importantly, the phrase reveals a failure to appreciate complexity. Many of history's greatest breakthroughs came precisely from questioning what everyone considered common sense at the time. Common sense once told us the Earth was flat, that heavier objects fall faster than lighter ones, and that bleeding patients would cure disease. When you hear yourself about to say something is just common sense, pause and consider what's happening psychologically. You might be trying to shut down a conversation that makes you uncomfortable, or attempting to establish intellectual dominance rather than seeking genuine understanding. Instead of dismissing ideas as obvious, try phrases that acknowledge different perspectives. "From my experience," or "the way I've come to understand this is." These alternatives show psychological maturity, the recognition that your perspective is just one among many, shaped by your unique experiences rather than universal truth. This shift in language reflects what Jung would call a move from unconscious identification with your thoughts, taking them as absolute reality, toward greater psychological differentiation, recognizing thoughts as subjective perspectives. Making this shift doesn't just change how others perceive you. It transforms how you engage with the world. Number 2, I'm just playing devil's advocate. The second phrase you should eliminate is, "I'm just playing devil's advocate," a statement often used before introducing a contrarian or potentially offensive viewpoint. From a Jungian perspective, this phrase reveals a fascinating psychological pattern. The use of a persona, or mask, to express shadow content. Those parts of ourselves that we've rejected or find socially unacceptable. Jung understood that we all have a shadow, the collection of traits, impulses, and thoughts that don't fit our conscious self-image. When we haven't properly integrated these shadow elements, they often emerge indirectly, disguised as something else. Playing devil's advocate frequently serves as this disguise. When someone prefaces a statement with this phrase, they're often attempting to distance themselves from the view they're about to express. This creates a kind of psychological plausible deniability. These aren't really my thoughts, I'm just exploring alternatives. But if we're truly just exploring ideas objectively, why do we need this disclaimer? The reality is that playing devil's advocate often allows us to express thoughts or opinions that we actually hold but aren't willing to own publicly. It lets us test controversial ideas while maintaining the safety net of being able to retreat if those ideas are poorly received. This isn't to say that exploring contrary perspectives is always problematic. Quite the opposite. Jung valued the ability to consider multiple viewpoints as essential to psychological development. The issue is specifically with using this phrase as a shield that prevents authentic engagement with your own thoughts. When you feel tempted to use this phrase, pause and ask yourself, why do I need this buffer? What am I afraid might happen if I simply express this view as my own question or concern? This self-reflection often reveals fears about rejection or judgment that are worth examining. Instead of saying, "I'm just playing devil's advocate," try more authentic alternatives. "I have a different perspective I'd like to share," or "I'm not fully convinced about this approach because," or simply asking a thoughtful question that opens up the alternative viewpoint you're considering. This shift from hiding behind a rhetorical device to speaking more directly reflects psychological integration. The willingness to own your thoughts rather than projecting them onto a devil's advocate persona. This integration doesn't just make you appear more intelligent. It represents actual psychological growth. Number 3, no offense, but. The third phrase to eliminate is no offense, but, along with its cousins. Don't take this the wrong way. I don't mean to be rude, but, or not to be critical, but. These phrases function as what Jung might call psychological contradictions, verbal statements that attempt to deny the very thing they're about to do. They reveal an internal conflict between the social desire to be polite and the impulse to express something potentially hurtful or critical. When you preface a statement with "no offense," you're essentially signaling that what follows might indeed be offensive. You're attempting to preemptively absolve yourself of responsibility for how your words affect others. Psychologically, this represents a splitting, an attempt to separate your words from their impact, your intention from the effect. Jung understood that psychological integration requires taking responsibility for all aspects of our communication, not just our conscious intentions, but also the impact we have on others. Mature communication involves owning both aspects rather than trying to split them apart. The use of these buffer phrases also reveals a lack of skill in delivering feedback constructively. Rather than doing the work of finding a genuinely respectful way to convey your message, you're using a disclaimer to excuse potentially clumsy or hurtful delivery. When you feel tempted to use one of these phrases, pause and reconsider your approach. Ask yourself, if I need this disclaimer, is there a more constructive way to frame my message? Often, you'll find that truly respectful communication doesn't require these buffers at all. Instead of saying "no offense, but your presentation was confusing," try, "I found myself getting lost during parts of the presentation. Could you clarify the main points?" This alternative focuses on your experience rather than making objective-sounding judgments about the other person's work. This shift from disclaimer-based communication to more direct and skillful expression reflects psychological maturity. The ability to be honest while remaining considerate without needing to split these aspects apart. It shows that you've developed the emotional intelligence to deliver difficult messages constructively. Number 4, I did my own research. The fourth phrase to eliminate is, "I did my own research," particularly when used to justify positions on complex technical, scientific, or specialized topics outside your area of expertise. From a Jungian perspective, this phrase often reveals what he would call inflation, an unconscious identification with the archetype of the expert or authority that extends beyond one's actual knowledge and capabilities. Jung understood that true psychological development involves recognizing both our capacities and our limitations. When someone without specialized training claims to have researched a complex topic like vaccine safety, climate science, or economic policy and reached conclusions that contradict expert consensus, they're often displaying not critical thinking, but psychological inflation. This doesn't mean experts are always right, or that non-experts can't have valid insights. But it does mean that a few hours of internet searching doesn't equate to years of specialized study and peer-reviewed work. The phrase reveals a misunderstanding of what constitutes genuine research and expertise. What's happening psychologically is an attempt to claim authority without doing the work required to earn it. In Jungian terms, it's a form of borrowing the cultural power associated with research and expertise without integrating the actual discipline and methodology that gives that authority its legitimacy. When you feel tempted to use this phrase, pause and consider what's motivating you. Is there an unconscious desire to elevate your status in the conversation? Are you trying to give your opinion more weight by cloaking it in the language of research? Instead of saying, "I did my own research," try more epistemically humble alternatives. "From what I've read," or "based on the sources I've found," or even better, "I'm not an expert, but I'm curious about." These alternatives acknowledge the limitations of your investigation while still allowing you to share what you've learned. This shift from claimed expertise to acknowledged learning reflects psychological right-sizing, the ability to accurately assess your own knowledge level without unconscious inflation. It shows that you're secure enough to acknowledge the limits of your understanding rather than overreaching for authority. Number 5. You always, or you never. The fifth category of statements to eliminate contains all absolute generalizations about others' behavior. You always interrupt me. You never listen. You're constantly late, and so on. From a Jungian perspective, these absolutist statements reveal what he would call projection, the unconscious attribution of our own psychological material onto others, often in exaggerated form. When we use absolutist language like always or never, we're not describing objective reality. No one always or never does anything. What we're actually expressing is our emotional experience of the situation, projected as an absolute fact about the other person. This projection performs several psychological functions. First, it simplifies complexity, reducing a nuanced pattern of interaction to a black and white characterization. Second, it locates the problem entirely in the other person, absolving us of any responsibility. Third, it often expresses accumulated emotion from past interactions, not just the current situation. Jung understood that mature psychological development involves withdrawing these projections, learning to distinguish between our subjective emotional reactions and objective reality. It also involves recognizing the role we play in relational dynamics rather than casting others as the sole problem. When you catch yourself about to use these absolute terms, pause and check whether you're engaging in projection. Ask yourself, is this literally true, or am I expressing my emotional reaction? What's my role in this dynamic? Instead of using absolutist language, try more accurate and ownable statements. I've noticed several times when I felt interrupted, or I'm feeling unheard in this conversation, or the last 3 meetings, I noticed you arrived after the start time. These alternatives focus on specific observations rather than sweeping characterizations. This shift from projection-based absolutes to specific observations reflects psychological integration, the ability to distinguish between emotional reactions and factual assessment. It shows that you've developed the capacity to express dissatisfaction without distorting reality through the lens of projection. Number 6. That's just who I am. The 6th phrase to eliminate is, that's just who I am, or its variations. That's just my personality. I've always been this way, or I can't help it. It's just how I'm wired. From a Jungian perspective, these statements reveal what he would call identification with a partial self-concept, mistaking one aspect of your personality or a habitual pattern for your entire, immutable identity. Jung understood that the human psyche is incredibly dynamic and contains multitudes, different sub-personalities, potential ways of being, and capacities for growth. When we claim that a particular trait or behavior is our fixed identity, we're unconsciously rejecting this psychological complexity and our own capacity for development. This fixed self-concept often functions as a defense mechanism. By claiming that a problematic behavior is your unchangeable identity, you avoid the discomfort of growth and the responsibility of addressing the behavior. It provides a ready-made excuse for not evolving. What's particularly interesting about this phrase is that it often emerges precisely when others have provided feedback that a certain behavior is problematic. Rather than engaging with this feedback, the fixed identity claim shuts down the conversation and rejects the possibility of change. When you find yourself about to use this phrase, pause and examine what's happening psychologically. Are you trying to avoid the vulnerability of growth? Are you rejecting feedback because it threatens your self-concept? Instead of claiming a fixed identity, try more growth-oriented alternatives. I've struggled with this pattern for a long time, or this is a habit I'm working to become more aware of, or I appreciate that feedback. It's not easy to change, but I'm trying to improve in this area. This shift from fixed identity to growth mindset reflects psychological development. The recognition that you are not just your current habits or patterns, but a dynamic being with the capacity for evolution. It shows that you've developed the courage to engage with feedback rather than defensively rejecting it. Number 7. I don't care what anyone thinks. The 7th and final phrase to eliminate is, I don't care what anyone thinks, or its variations. I don't give a damn what people think of me. Others' opinions don't matter to me, or I'm not concerned with what anyone else thinks. From a Jungian perspective, this statement often reveals what he would call compensation, an exaggerated psychological position that develops in reaction to its opposite. In this case, the claim of complete indifference to others' opinions usually masks an underlying hypersensitivity to those very opinions. Jung understood that genuine psychological maturity involves neither excessive concern with others' judgments nor complete dismissal of social feedback. The integrated position recognizes the value of selected feedback while maintaining inner autonomy. When someone repeatedly insists they don't care what others think, they're often revealing that they actually care deeply. So deeply that they've developed this compensatory stance as a psychological defense. The very energy behind the statement betrays its inaccuracy. This isn't to suggest you should be overly concerned with others' opinions or seek approval for every decision. But truly, confident people don't need to announce their indifference to judgment. They simply demonstrate it through their actions while remaining open to valuable feedback. What's psychologically interesting is that this statement attempts to portray disconnection from social concern as strength, when in fact it often represents fear. Fear of vulnerability, fear of criticism, fear of not measuring up. True strength lies in the ability to remain open to feedback without being controlled by it. When you find yourself about to make this claim, pause and check what's happening inside. Are you perhaps trying to protect yourself from the pain of criticism by preemptively rejecting all social input? Instead of claiming total indifference, try more nuanced alternatives. I try to be selective about whose feedback I take to heart, or I care about the perspectives of people I respect, but I don't let criticism paralyze me. Or simply, I'm working on finding a balance between being open to feedback and maintaining my own direction. This shift from compensatory indifference to balanced discernment reflects psychological integration, the ability to remain connected to social reality while maintaining healthy boundaries. It shows that you've developed the security to engage with others' perspectives without being dominated by them. As we've explored these 7 phrases to eliminate from your vocabulary, a deeper pattern emerges. Each reveals a psychological mechanism that interferes with both how you're perceived and your actual development as a mature individual. Jung believed that conscious awareness is the key to psychological growth. By becoming aware of these verbal patterns and the psychological mechanisms behind them, you gain the power to choose more integrated ways of expressing yourself. This isn't about policing your language for superficial reasons. It's about recognizing that your words both reflect and reinforce your psychological state. When you speak from psychological inflation, projection, or compensation, you strengthen those patterns in yourself. Conversely, when you choose more integrated language, you actively develop greater psychological maturity. The benefit isn't just that others will perceive you as more intelligent, though that will certainly happen. The deeper value is that you'll actually become more psychologically integrated, approaching Jung's ideal of individuation, the process of becoming your most complete and authentic self. So the next time you catch yourself about to say one of these 7 things, pause. Consider what psychological pattern might be operating. Ask yourself what a more integrated response might look like. Then choose your words consciously, not just to sound smarter, but to become wiser. Because in the end, true intelligence isn't about appearing smart in the moment. It's about the ongoing process of psychological development, integrating the diverse aspects of your psyche into a more complete whole. And that journey begins with the words you choose, both in your internal dialogue and your communication with others. As Jung himself said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." By becoming conscious of these patterns in your speech, you take a powerful step toward directing your own psychological development, rather than being directed by unconscious patterns. Start today. Listen to your own speech. Notice when these phrases emerge, and make the choice to express yourself from a place of greater integration and awareness. Your words shape not just how others perceive you, but who you actually become.